Human groups are made of human systems. This show stands at the practical intersection of counterintelligence, trauma psychology, and systems thinking. My research focuses on how people, groups, and institutions lose the ability to see reality clearly, and what happens when decisions keep getting made anyway. I'm Kit Perez, and this has changed the game. Welcome to the first episode of Change the Game. Today's conversation is about orientation, how people, leaders, and systems understand reality, and what happens when that understanding collapses. Today I'm joined by Mark McGrath from the World of Reorientation and Mike Jones from Strategy Meets Reality. We'll be talking about why leadership failure is usually orientation failure, how organizations protect false narratives under stress, and why speed, certainty, and confidence often make things worse and not better. So first off, let's start with you, Mark. What is it that you do?
I embed with leaders and operators in VUCA environments at critical decision-making levels to help them understand effectively how they can actually change the frame to become more competitive, more creative, more cooperative, the ability to improve coordination and defeat their competitors and thrive in chaotic, nonlinear, asymmetrical environments.
Perfect, but not faster, right? We'll get
Not
into that
faster,
later.
no. Yeah. That's that. Yeah, speed can be a product of orientation, but it's not the goal. And yes, I do have a lot to say about that.
Right? It's like my favorite complaint about anything OODA related when people start talking about speed. But we'll
Mm.
definitely get into that. Mike, how about you? What is it that you do?
I'm a strategy advisor for a lot of sort of major large organizations in the UK. Um, my background's military, so the idea of orientation comes from um, the love and sort of being taught Boyd's work on an early age. But how orientation is for me, because I have a big belief that strategy is the ongoing act of orientation. So it's like how do we support organizations and leaders to continuously interpret, adapt, and act within its environment. And a lot of my work is all about strategy meets reality. So it's about reality, where I think a lot of people nowadays are firmly detached from reality and their orientation. They're not willing to um, reconstruct or adapt their orientation to what's actually happening.
Now, and so you say you're a vet. I know, Mark, you're a Marine as well.
Mhm.
So both of you guys bring that military experience to the table, and both of you have podcasts, which don't let me forget to make sure to send people to those as well. I I saw, Mark, that you just had your PTSD episode was actually I started listening to it and didn't have time because I had to prep for this, but it sounded really fantastic what I did hear. So,
That's it's hard to talk about that episode because I think it's one of our best that we've ever done. And to have a guy like Dr. Yuval Nuria, who won the equivalent, the Israeli equivalent of the Medal of Honor or the British Victoria Cross as a young 21-year-old officer in the Yom Kippur War of 12 days of straight fighting before he had to be medevaced. By the way, that decoration's only been awarded 40 times in Israel's history,
hmm.
so it's extremely rare. And to speak with him, I think when you watch that video, more so the video than the listing, but when you see it, I mean, we're having a three-way conversation among veterans. We have a Israeli tank commander, we have a Marine artillery officer, and a Navy fighter jet guy having a convo about PTSD and how to heal from it, and exploring a lot of the therapies. Which, if you've tuned into our show, which I know you have, we talk a lot about various therapies, including and not limited to psychedelic therapies. We had Dr. Nico Grunman on not long ago, who, by the way, is now sponsoring. So if you look at that episode, it's sponsored by his outfit, Ember Health, and they're one of the world's leading ketamine IV clinics.
Hmm.
and they've helped veterans, first responders, 9/11 advisors or 9/11 survivors, 9/11 like sexual assault victims, help them deal with their PTSD, their depression, and their success rates off the page. And I'm friends with Dr. Grunman and his wife Tiffany. We hope to actually have them on the show soon to tell the story, less of the helping veterans, but more of how it all started because she does not have a medical background. But it's a beautiful thing that they're doing here. And when you talk to Dr. Nuria, what we learned is things like just like having a dog, or going and having they call it equine therapy, has a profound effect on vets. And then when you compound it in, he talked about ketamine as well, being highly effective. Dr. Grunman surprised us, the treatment, it only takes 4 sessions over 2 weeks, and they have a really high rate of success. But yeah, you're gonna love that episode. It's really powerful, and I hope that all veterans not only watch it, but like if they're suffering or hurting, and they need help with healing, we got a guy. And it's right here. It's right here in New York City. The Emperor Health, and I think that the Dr. Nuri episode will add a lot to that. So
That's awesome. I that's actually a really good segue into the first question that I want to throw out on the table when he talks about this 12 days and he talks about how and he doesn't say it in so many words, but essentially there's a before and there's an after. And it's like this defining point where you're one person before this happens and you're another person after it happens because
yeah.
of this forced orientation, so to speak. And so I kind of want to throw out to you first, Mike, orientation failure versus leadership failure. Is
Can
there a
I
difference?
add a little color to what you just said, Kit?
Sure, go ahead.
That what you brought up, the environment, the medium is the message that had a direct effect on him. But one of the things that really my favorite part of the episode was he says, like, a lot of people get these types of medals like the Medal of Valor, the Victoria Cross, or the Congressional Medal of Honor, because they're suicidal or they're psycho or they've gone off the deep end. He goes, and for me, it was the opposite. For me, I mean, what he was describing was keeping my orientation shattered and revised and updated and constantly not trying to force on the environment what I want it to be, but dealing
Mhm.
with it for what it actually was. And that's how he said he got out of it all and how he was able to do what he did from a sense of, leadership and fighting, that he never lost control in that respect. He kept well, again, it's if you go back and watch it, it's a beautiful description of how orientation functions in chaotic, nonlinear environments, and that's really what he said.
That's I'm excited to get to that part of it. Like I say, I wasn't able to listen to the whole thing, but Mike, let's talk leadership failure. What's the difference between leadership failure and orientation failure? Or is there a difference?
I don't think there is. I think leading on to what Mark just said, it's quite clear when you say he's not. He said he didn't force what he wanted on reality, or some of those words, and I think that's what happens. I think there's a and you see it a lot with the sort of Simon Sinek kind of view of leadership and all that. Like it's all about aspiration first. That's detached from reality. So people try to force a reality, an aspiration on something that's not matched with the organization or the leader themselves. So they'll say, "Oh, I'm this great leader," or "This organization, our purpose is to achieve this." But they're not. That's not changing through their constant interaction and reorientation of the external environment they're in. So it becomes detached, and when it comes detached and they become internalized, i.e., they only believe their internal narrative, and they don't listen to the feedbacks that's happening. They discard it. They only look for things to confirm their belief that's confirm that they already believe. That's when orientation and leadership starts to collapse. And you see this all too often, and it's all because of this narrative warfare that organizations rage about. Is all about what they say they are, not what they are, and that happens at a leadership level too.
Mark?
Yeah, I mean, when Mike was describing himself, I I knew our answers would be something similar because we do similar things. So I was trying to distinguish, but one of the things he meant was that he mentioned was strategy advisor, and that's what we do. Um, but what following on what Mike is saying is when we go into an organization, we're looking at exactly that. We're trying to help them figure out where they are because they really don't know. They're not oriented to reality. They're oriented to an idea of where they think they are, or their bias of where they think they should be, and we try to give them a pretty crystal clear vision of where they actually are at. Because a lot of times people will say, "Oh, we want to be here in 5 years. We want to be here in 10 years." And you say, "That's great, but you don't know where you are now." And you ask them, "Where are you now?" And they can't tell you. Orientation and leadership. I mean, I think leadership follows a good orientation. If I'm using Boyd's definitions of leadership, I mean, orientation is still going to be prime, and quality leadership or effective leadership is going to be downstream of an orientation that's aligned with reality, and that's what we ultimately are trying to do: help them align to reality, as maybe a competitor might see it. Because a lot of times we show people where their gaps are, or if I were going to attack you, here's where I would attack, or even asking them, because nobody asked them this. Say, hey, if you were your top competitor, where would you attack you? And it
Yeah.
gets them to uh, shatter and revise their orientation and try to update it and keep it matched to what's going on.
When
And
you ask that question, sorry, Mike, one sec. When you ask that question, do you get the deer in the headlights look?
Oftentimes, yeah, because a lot of times people are engaging a consultant thinking that they're going to agree with everything that I believe, or, um, I'm smarter than you. I went to Harvard. You only went to Marquette, or, I have an MBA. You only have a master's in economics, or whatever, for whatever reason. Um, when you tell somebody what they need to hear versus what they want to hear, yeah, oftentimes you do get a very deer in the headlights look. And then you try to explain to them, well, what happened is I just froze your orientation. I just locked it. Now, a competitor could do the same exact thing with a market scenario unfolding, and if you don't understand what's going on, you're going to get defeated. So let me help you self-disrupt this so that you can improve your capacity for free and independent action. And then in turn, we can go disrupt our competitors, and then you can win. That's the
Right. You can't save them until you first make them realize how lost they are, right?
the self-reflection is critical, and we do everything we can to be as honest as we can and holding up the mirror, not honest because we're honest, but like as accurate as we can to hold the mirror up
Right.
to them so that they can see who they really are and what they really believe, what's really happening.
Okay. Mike,
yeah,
what was your thought?
yeah, yeah. Just quickly add on that, and that's why I think a lot of traditional consulting doesn't really work because they're not doing it with them; they're doing it away in a room, and then they're not building that orientation. So they're coming in going, "Oh, look at this great stuff we've done," but because they've not done any of that cognitive work, it means nothing. And the point I was going to make was about even in that leadership team a large issue is not really it's the perceptual complexity is that because we're all as my mum told me once that I was unique and special. She wasn't lying. But that's the challenge. We're in this collective system. We're all unique and individual. We all have our own orientation, and there's that perceptual complexity. The power is in the interpretation, and it's like how do you bridge that so that we can try and get it's never going to be perfect, but we try and get that shared orientation as a leadership team to try and help us. But because we don't talk that way, we don't realize the perceptual complexity. We just assume that we're talking the same thing, and the words mean the same thing, and that's where already you start to see the team fracture.
So that kind of leads into you guys were just talking about narratives. Why would a system, whether it be, it doesn't even really matter the industry, right? But why would a human system protect their false narrative once they are stressed? Is it just because they don't know it's false? Is it really that simple? Mike, let's start with you.
There's an easy answer in the sense it's comfortable. It is very comfortable to believe something, and I think we have I had a really great lady on Delia McCabe, and ever met her, and she was talking about actually the neuroscience behind why people protect and how much new information it needs to create change, and is a lot. But I think it's in some it's comforting to think that to have that instead of having to face the harsh realities of what's actually happening. And that comes back to Mark's point earlier about the deer in the headlights. It's like you say something really uncomfortable for them, and it's really attacking their sense of identity. And I think that's real hard trouble. Either the identity of them as a leader or the identity of an organization. And I think that's why mixed with a little bit of ego comes really really challenging.
Mark, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, comfort's an easy thing to spot when you embed inside an organization and you're taking in their culture and you're seeing how people interact. Comfort is usually something that you can identify fairly, sometimes quickly, but certainly readily um, when you listen to people that are maybe risk averse or don't want, they're very resistant to change. And what they fail to realize is that that comfort leads to complacency, and that's their hour of maximum danger. That's when they become the most vulnerable. I mean, you've heard us talk on the show. You can read on the World of Reorientation Substack. We talk about Blockbuster a lot, and the reality is that it's one easy example. Um, it's just the reality of it is it's easy to point out that nobody wanted anything to change. I like
Mm.
my beach house and I like my apartment in New York City and I like my country house in Westchester County and I like my stock options or whatever it is, and I'm not doing anything to risk that at all. I'm not jeopardizing any of that. So we're just going to double down and keep building up what it is that we think we know and what we think we do, because we're used to it. And when you point that out to somebody, when you point out the comfort, I think you'll get to well, actually, here, let me use a different example than Blockbuster. If we've read Steve Jobs's bio, by Walter Isaacson, or rather Walter Isaacson's biography of Steve Jobs, Steve Jobs was never comfortable. He was constantly breaking things moving forward, constantly reorienting. And why they fired him, I mean, the sort of overall general sort of layman's answer is like, why did they fire Steve Jobs? Why did he get fired from the company that he started and built and made, billions with? Which because all the comfortable people wanted him out. All the people that wanted him to do what normal, quote unquote, normal people do when they have money to, hey, relax and write that check to the charity or the church or the museum or whatever. Look, we've got money and houses and cars. We've got things that we have to consider. Jobs was the opposite. Jobs was never letting himself get comfortable. And I think that the reason that he amassed so much wealth was because he could reject comfort and um, that world of reorientation pretty well.
Yeah,
So
And I
and
think,
it's
oh, go ahead, Mike.
I was just saying, yeah, back onto Apple now. If you see it, because ever since they released the iPad, they were always an individual in the sense of against competitors. They were always individual till they released the iPad, and then suddenly all the other tech sort of people sort of merged around them, and now they're stuck in this herd that they just can't get out of because it could be orientation problems, it's comfort problems, but there's a massive risk for them to do something different to make them an individual again, even though their they say their identity is this individual that is still calling back, harking back on Steve Jobs, but the whole structural identity has changed now, and I don't think they understand how to change that.
Well, that kind of takes us to the next question that I had. When you talk about the difference between adaptation and collapse, I mean, it's kind of an easy answer for the three of us to say, well, obviously that's an orientation failure. But let's go a couple layers deeper than that. Mark,
it
what do you
it
think?
it, it
Let's
doesn't have to necessarily be failure. It could just be the orientation was different, or the orientation wasn't connected the same way, or the orientate because the nature of VUCA, right? Ambiguity. They just saw it differently. It might. there are things I think where you could say, well, you could point to something, yeah, that's catastrophic failure. Or rather take it back higher. Catastrophic failures, it's downstream of an orientation that wasn't aligned with reality, really. So, you know, the failure, I don't necessarily, because the orientation is going to do what the orientation is going to do, whether you reorient it or not, and whether you are aligning it or not, that's on you. The results downstream, good or bad, are going to be a direct reflection of that. So if I have a catastrophic business failure, like in the case of Blockbuster, could call it orientation failure. You could just say it was a different, or you could just say, it's just a very different orientation than Netflix had, or Netflix had a very different orientation that they could see what Blockbuster refused to see.
But isn't it true that if you have an orientation that is different, as you put it, it's if it's not aligned with actual reality, it is by default wrong, yes? Or am I being too simplistic?
Well, alignment not always. Sometimes it gets into a tricky term, but like reality is still what we think it is, not what it actually is. No matter what changes, everybody's orientation and even the fractal unified orientation of a team or whatever, we're still operating in what we think reality is, what we think reality would be, not what it actually is. It's almost like we're completely incapable of knowing, at least in this physical lifetime down here on planet Earth, before our souls move on. But like I think that that's really what it is. And like if we agree that our picture is this, and we agree to, work toward to achieve this, I mean, we end up creating our own reality. Um, but yeah, there are things that we can point to and say, yeah, I wasn't reading the market forces. I didn't understand the volatility. I was favoring certainty over uncertainty. you know, yeah, those are disconnected from reality for sure. In other words, the dissonance is greater than because again, we can never be perfectly aligned.
That's fair. That's fair. Mike,
Mm.
what do you want to add?
So yeah, I think, and a lot of it comes down to every organization, even human, we've got this tension between change and status quo. We've got equilibrium and we need change because um, the world it sounds a thing in the world is changing, of course it is. But the external environment you're in adapts and it changes over time. So there's always that tension you got to do. But where I tend to see organisations go to failure is that they don't really understand that the organisation itself bounds what's possible by through capability, information flow, all that stuff, and they disregard that and they come disconnected from what I want to achieve and where we're going to go and what capability or resources we have to get us there, and they will either um, push the organization to its limits beyond limits and it won't deliver, it can't deliver on it, or they exceed what we call the change rate. And if you exceed the change rate of the organization, then you'll start to destabilize it, and destabilization over time would lead to collapse. But that's where when you're in the when you're looking, and people always challenge me, well, what are you trying to say, that you can't be ambitious? You can be ambitious, but you need to realize that it's not a linear path. And you can see it, but it's you've got to look at, well, where are we now, and this is where orientation comes in versus that. And then because of the situation we're in, what's afforded to us, what things do we need to do first. And I know we want to get over there, but it's not a linear path. We need to see what's afforded to us. Once we've done that, what options are now, what adjacent to possibles are there, what other options are there, and that's how we have to navigate. And that's what really demands great orientation for a leader, is because as we're doing those, we need to be able to reorientate to the new context, new situation. Now, what's possible compared to where we're trying to go? And I think that's where they go to collapse, because they ignore that. They just try and push all efforts to a linear path, exceed the rate of the organization, and then collapse.
So that's kind of a perfect segue into what I was going to ask Mark, because when we talk about, we kind of mentioned it earlier, this idea of speed as the goal as opposed to a potential outcome. And now you're talking about linear things. So it's almost like people see OODA loop and they think, oh, it's like this. And I'm going in a straight line and I'm just going around and around and around in a linear way. But it's kind of like I'm just doing this cycle over and over and and there's no real focus on orientation. It's just how fast can I do these rotations, so to speak. Mark, that's your cue to shine.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
it's yeah, they think it's an RPM game, right? Like your
Yeah.
instruments in your looks like Mike has like an F1 picture behind.
Yeah, the boy with Verstappen.
Who
There
is
you
it?
go. Max Verstappen,
Oh yeah,
the
Matt. I
champion.
see.
Yeah, there we go.
Now
Winner.
we're showing our Mike and my age difference. I go back to Ayrton Senna.
Oh, right. Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
who, by the way, I think we could talk about him for hours about, uh, being the best at orientation. But, RPMs, the engine's running, it's going and going, but if it's not oriented, it doesn't matter. So speed is great, but if it's not oriented, it doesn't matter. You're just going to go really fast in the wrong direction. So when I see things, they say speed kills, or they're going to explain Boyd in terms of speed, they're going to explain Boyd in terms of OODA loop speed. That's what you want your competitors to think. And if there are books out there teaching that, or podcasts out there teaching that, you want to make sure that your competitors are getting that. That your competitors, you send that to your competitors. Hey, you really like this thing about John Boyd? They're talking about this OODA, OODA. You just go really fast in a circle. Send that to them, because the people that we're advising and speaking to about orientation are going to destroy them every single time. It doesn't matter how fast you are. Blockbuster was really fast. They were just going really fast in the wrong direction.
So you're essentially constantly trying to balance your need to correct people's idea of what OODA is while also protecting your clients from, making sure that they have the correct information while also making sure their enemies do not.
We could put out, as we do on the podcast and the Substack, we put out what authentic Boyd is every single day. I talk about it all the time. Most won't listen. Why? Because it goes back to that mirror being held up to them that they don't want to see, or it goes back of getting them out of their comfort zone. So all the stuff is out there and we teach it. And if I looked at 100 companies, 80 are going to not pay attention to a word we say. 20 might listen, and of those 20, four will really follow up. But it turns out, I bet every single time that those four would be the most successful of that 100 companies, because they're trying to constantly reorient. They're constantly trying to improve their situation. So, I forgot where I was going with that. I wanted to bring it
No,
back
no,
to
no,
your
you're good.
point.
It's Kyle Shepard on Substack is somebody I follow, and I love that every day he puts up a reflection worth considering. And every single morning, like clockwork, there's this question, and it's meant to kind of force you into this orientation mode. Like, what is it that I'm
Yeah.
thinking? What am I thinking about? And this morning, I was talking about the question, how do I contribute to the problem? And that's a really hard question to ask. And that's true regardless of the environment that you're in, whether
Hmm.
it's your marriage, whether it's your work, whether it's your relationship with your kids, whatever it is. Um, we don't like, and that goes back to the comfort thing that we were talking about earlier. I
Hmm.
want to believe that I am the objective variable in all of my situations,
Yeah.
right? We all do
Yeah.
that. And so
Yeah,
to
yeah.
ask the
Well, we
question,
are. Whether we like it or not, we're the star of our own movies,
right?
you know.
Yeah.
Um, and
So go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Mike.
I was going to say, well, that's the problem in most organizations and why they sort of collapse a bit because they, especially leaders, they think they are the stars, and that's the problem. Um, they don't. We still got this heroic leadership that this leader, was one leader, will have all the answers, know where to go, and not, you know, if you think about, well, what problem are they bringing? The problems they're bringing is they're not listening,
Hmm.
and they're not challenging their own orientation and their beliefs because they are not willing to. I see. I was only in an organization last week. I was just following around the execs, and it was really interesting because they were going, "Oh, let's go down and let's go." It was like go visit the peasants, And it is like, they should be so happy that we are gracing them with our presence.
Hmm.
When I had to say to him, say, no, stop, stop. This whole thing about you going to your organization in wider depths is not about your presence. It's not about, isn't it great that you're there? It's about you to challenge your own beliefs and orientation about what is actually going on in your organization.
Do you ever hear the Sam Walton story? It may be apocryphal, but the way it was told to me was that they'd be on, in the early days of Walmart or whatever, they'd be driving around, and I say they, be Sam and I don't know, his head of marketing or who knows who. And they would stop somewhere and they'd go into a competitive store, like another grocery store or whatever. And, they'd come out, and the difference between Sam Walton and the other executive that was with him, the other executive wanted to get back in the car and hit the road, whereas, or say something like, well, this place, this is not as big as we are, so what does it matter? Whereas Sam Walton's perspective was, wow, did you see that display that they had in aisle 7? We should really try something like that. Or wow, did you see what they had
Yeah.
over there? Like, he just had a completely different orientation than someone that may have been a little more, I don't know if we were talking about comfort or complacent earlier, but maybe along those lines.
Hmm.
Yeah, agree.
So, how do you know when reform or fixing the orientation is no longer possible? Like, when do you look at a company and go, you guys are so beyond,
Hmm.
you all should just go
Mhm.
home? Like, can you ever get to that point, Mark?
Yeah, case by case. I mean, there's companies that we actually won't work with. We just won't. We just because in the process of getting to know them, or you know something gets found out, it won't fit. We're just spinning our wheels. Something will show up, or an easy way too, especially when you're doing advisory with leaders one on one, where they don't fall through, they don't read anything, they don't take the time, they're not going to go with you down and go see for themselves, and it just gets to the point where, like, let's not. I think this is going to be a good time to stop. You have to
Like,
want to do the work. You have to, especially with Boyd things, you have to want to do this stuff. You have to want to learn it. You have to want to implement it. And what's cool is it's completely flexible to any audience, right? I can tailor make it to just about anybody in their own terms, and they don't have to know anything about John Boyd at all. Um, but yeah, there are signals. Some are stronger than others.
Mm.
Mike, what's your experience?
Yeah, on an individual level, working with leaders and teams is like, I would say that there needs to be a need. You can't force someone to change and to um dismiss the self narrative they've got. There has to be a will, a want to do something and change. If they don't have that, then you're not going to do anything. And I have plenty of leaders before where they'll pay you, but they're not doing anything. And you think, what's the point? On a on an organizational level, it's slightly different in the sense, before we're talking about leaders and their egos and not wanting to do that. Organizational level, a lot of times they come in and they want to do stuff, but they're so stressed because they've got so many conflicting demands. They've probably had Deloitte or someone in there because they've stripped out all their people for efficiency. So they're working. They've done the classic "do more for less" type mentality, and they're so stretched that they can't absorb anything else. So I'm like, there's until you can get yourself to a point of stability, and make some difficult choices about what are you going to stop and not do, and try and sort this mess out. There's no point me coming in because I'm just going to break you. So you need to get to that point. And I think there's that. So I think there's the organizational point where they're beyond, and I think there's the individual point.
Do you straight up say that I'm just going to break you?
Yeah, yeah. Like I'm quite an
Love it.
honest. A lot of people know me. I'm a very honest guy, and I'm like, Jesus, like the stuff that you want to do or you need to do to be competitive again in the external environment. That demand is far beyond what you can do now because there's nothing more that you can absorb. I walk down, and I've seen their people, and they're like broken because
Wow.
they've gone. I wrote on the Substack not long ago called Unrestricted Warfare, and what it was a look at what China's doctrine against the Americans. They knew they couldn't defeat the Americans outright militarily, so they've come up with this unrestricted warfare. And really, what it was is about how can we fight on so many different, multiple different fronts that we saturate the Americans so much that they can't. Their whole willingness to fight is gone. And I was thinking, well, isn't this just what we do to organizations? We do so much on multiple fronts. Everyone's got a strategy. Oh, we've got an IT strategy, HR strategy, we've got this coming in, we've got this initiative coming in. Oh, wouldn't it be fun to do this? And but we also still want you to deliver the value for the organization. And they're so stretched and just at the point of breaking point. So if you then come in and go, right, for us to do this, we need to build a capability here, we need to do this change here, we need this direction to here, they'll just be like, I can't absorb anymore, and it'll break. So I'm like, you need to get to a point of stability, and then we can then get you there. We call it settlement rate. You need to have a settlement rate before you can do anything else.
Do you guys find that all the different initiatives, like you talk about, all of these, how to make better decisions, that umbrella label has so many different things underneath it. And it seems like there's trends, right? Like, oh, everybody's doing this now. Oh, everybody's doing this other thing now. But they're almost like they're just layering these things on top of each other as opposed to disengaging and re-engaging. And so at the end of the day, when you guys walk into these companies, are you finding just this mismatch? I can't even talk, mishmash of just crap? Mark?
I mean, it goes back to what we're there for. We're there to help people build orientation, and they're constantly. This is again one of the big things that people misunderstand Void. They think it's a decision-making tool. Like we're there to help
Mm.
make better decisions, and that's that's not necessarily why we're there. I mean, we're good decisions should be the product of a orientation that's matched to reality, with leaders with orientations that are matched to reality, and decisions should improve, not for decision's sake, because that's a request that we get. Will help us make better decisions. I'm like, about what and for what reason, and when you have a conversation about orientation, um, that's how you change the game. Not just going to look to make better decisions for better decisions' sake. That's like saying, make me a faster runner for what? Well, I want to be really fast at, like, I want to run a 10K or whatever. Okay, but if you don't do the mental things that you have to do, how fast you run, it's not going to matter. I always like to point out, when I went to officer candidate school at Quantico, it's a bloodletting. I mean, you show up and you don't stop running until you leave. And the heat is, at least in the summer, it was, 98 every day and 100% humidity is terrible. And our physical training program is designed and actually led by rural Marines. So it's even more psychotic. But one of the things I'll never forget as long as I live was, somebody I knew, who was in, I was in great shape, but this guy was like a gazelle, like in a completely different league when it came to things like running and fitness. I mean, this guy was a poster child for running and things like that, and it didn't matter at all. And he ended up DORing, or a drop on request, and quitting OCS, because he didn't have the right orientation of what it would take to be a Marine officer, to drive you through all of that, hate to say the word abuse, but all that hardship that you're embroiled in for months before you earn the right to be a Marine officer. And for him, it was a complete moral mental collapse, not a physical collapse.
Mm.
So, Mike, when you guys get called in,
Oh,
do
and if
you,
can I add
oh,
to that, Kit? Because you've seen
go
me
for it.
write about this. So I was talking about the physical disconnected from the mental and moral. This is also a very big part with John Boyd and Sun Tzu, where at the physical level, a business will be thinking about, well, we've got all this money and we've got all this tech and we've got all this stuff, but their mental and moral are misaligned and disconnected, and then they're almost certain to fail.
Hmm.
Mm.
Sorry, I just had to take a minute to kind of process what you were saying because that's a really good point. Um, so Mike, when you get to these companies or when you start talking to companies about coming to work with them, do you find that your fixes, however you want to phrase that, do you find that they come too late?
Um, yeah, but I think that's just the nature of the job we're in because um, no one starts like a initiative or a strategy and go, oh, do you know what? Let's get Mike in beforehand. It'd be great. It's more like they'll do it. Bless them, maybe they do it themselves, and they get into a lot of challenges and issues, and then it's like, come on, let's bring someone in. So normally, it's not that it's too late. There's just a lot of unpicking to do to get them to that point and back to where you can really start moving again. Ideally, it'd be great if they went at the start. They were just like, "Oh, we want to do this. Let's get Mike in and his team, and we can help them through." And but the challenge I often do have, and I think it's a bit lines of what Mark was saying, is that um, it's when you go into an organization, there always seems to be this mismatch between um, what they say they are and what they are. So organizations all the time, you see it. Like I was talking to a banking group, and their purpose statement, as they were, was that we help Britain prosper. And you're like, well, that's not what you do. You're a bank, and actually, all
Right.
your actions are completely different to that. And so we have this sort of psychosis of a business. So really, you're trying to get them back to go, well, what are you? And then everything sort of makes sense. You've got to rebuild their sort of heritage back, the moral part, and back to really clear on what they are, and then that makes everything a lot easier from there because then you can go, well, all these initiatives you're doing that doesn't really actually mean anything. So that's just someone's good idea. Let's get rid of those. Right now, you know who you are. When we look out to the external environment, we actually really know what's actually afforded to us now, rather than what we think is afforded to us. So we do tend to have that bit of challenge at the start.
Mark, how would you answer that question?
I mean, not very differently
I
from
didn't
what
figure.
yeah, because people McLuhan, who I talk a lot about, Marshall McLuhan, would call that narcissus narcosis. Like we're basically numb to reality. Like we're basically numb to who we are. Um, and we don't have those internal and external disruptions to keep pushing us to remind us of who we are or show us, who we're trying to become. Um, Yeah, I mean that's a great example of the way Mike described it. That's one of the ways leaders can be completely disoriented. They're completely disoriented because they think they're this, but they're actually that. Go back to the Netflix Blockbuster example. Blockbuster was number one in home entertainment from a retail mindset, a retail frame of thinking. Come to our stores, they're great. You can get all these movies. Netflix had a completely different. They saw themselves as something completely different. We're in the get movies to your house as fast as we can business. That disparity was why they were successful and why Blockbuster failed.
Yeah.
Mm,
I think it's
That's the dissonance.
interesting listening to you guys
yeah.
talk about these sprawling organizations that you work with, whereas, my work's more with 5 to 7 man cells or even
Mm,
these national organizations, whether they call themselves political or not, they are, right? And
hmm
and 10 years ago, it was all about the Facebook groups. How big could you get your group? And we're a bunch of patriots and we believe in this and that and the other. And
Mm,
obviously, what you're talking about, the psychosis, I love that you use that word because it's not a diagnosis. Obviously, you're not sitting here and trying to say you guys are a bunch of psychos, but you maybe you are,
Yeah, yeah.
but you're basically saying, hey, there's a whole bunch of fused identity where your unmet emotional needs, maybe even your trauma, maybe who you personally, your identity, who you believe you are,
mm,
is not who you actually are. And you bring that to your group, whether it's three of you, whether it's 10 of you, whether it's 5,000 of you,
mm,
all of you are bringing this identity of who you believe you are. And the more people you have, obviously, that problem is exponentially grown. And now you guys are coming in after the fact saying, okay, organizationally, you have no idea who you are. Do you find yourself having to get into the nitty-gritty of, listen, Mr. Leader, you are not personally who you say you are?
I mean, you have to be careful of that because you could find yourself, losing your contract pretty quick. Um, I think it comes back to like a good teacher, a good guide, which we endeavor to be, will help those leaders and operators see that as something that's self-evident to them. That that I mean, clearly they engage us because they think for some reason that they could and improve. Well, if I can improve, then I can reorient, and if I can reorient, that means that maybe my perspective and grip on reality is probably different than reality actually is, and I need to learn how to improve. I mean, ultimately, Kit, we're teachers, right? We're
Mhm.
also pretty, Ponch and I are pretty aggressive students. I mean, we constantly study this stuff nonstop. We're constantly testing it. We're constantly looking for new ideas to add to it. Um, so you know, our one requirement of who you are, I would hope that it would be a student and a willing learner, because that's the only way that you're going to be able to. That's the only way where we're going to have success. But that you know, I find that the more I learn and the more I read and the more I study, the less I actually know. And that's also, that to me is like that's the cattle prod of ensuring that you stay on this whirl of reorientation. As Boyd would say, the conceptual spiral, where you have to learn, relearn, unlearn, learn again, relearn, unlearn. You're on this continuous cycle of destruction, creation, of breaking things apart and reassembling. Um, Maybe another way to say it, Kit, would be that leaders and operators, they to thrive. I mean, they really do have to have some sense of humility, that they don't
There's
know
that healthy
everything.
embarrassment thing that we've talked about.
Absolutely, yeah.
Mike, what's your experience in that realm?
Yeah,
Obviously, if you're willing to go to companies and say, I'm going to break you, I'm guessing you're probably slightly more aggressive than Mark.
yeah. I'm known for a bit of a quite direct. So, that's going to be something people like or not. But I do think sometimes my job is there as an advisor is to be quite, you know, firm and challenging. But you got to have respect, and I suppose it's humility both ways. I can always admit when, I've made a mistake or have gone too far, and you know, I hope, they do the same and they have humility. But you've got to be challenging in a way, because I think we've got to this point in such a long time that we've got, for the last sort of 20, 30 years, exec MBAs and all those lot have been trying to, and coaches, any coaches out there, apologies. Well, I'm not apologizing. But they've got into this point where they've taught leaders that, they're Harry Potter. They can wave a magic wand and have the right mindset, and that's all it's done. And that's what we do. We
Mm,
go, you have the right mindset and you achieve anything. We'll get some Lego out. You show me some abstract version of your future, but using Lego, and suddenly that's gonna work. And I think sometimes, is my whole business around when strategy meets reality. You know,
mm,
you have to be a bit challenging to challenge those. Go, "Well, so when's that last worked?"
I, I like one of my favorite examples for consulting comes from uh, Mike's background. T.E. Lawrence. He's one of my consulting models because he challenged all assumptions. He was able to serve as the bridge between two completely different worlds, um, and was culturally adept enough to embed inside of an organization and help them from inside and then project outward. And if I had to pick one model of how I try to act as a strategic advisor, yeah, T.E. Lawrence would certainly be
Mm,
one of my models for sure. Probably my number one model. I mean, I've studied him pretty extensively, and that's ultimately what you're trying to do. You're trying to get people. Sometimes there's so many different complexities. There's so many different cultural complexities within an organization, and you're trying to get them to do extraordinary things by empowering their leadership to understand that they have to inspire their people to achieve, you know, worthy goals,
mm,
to be successful, which I think success is the pursuit of a worthy goal. And but you have to do that very honestly. You have to do it very respectfully. You have to do it firmly. Mike used that word. I think firm.
mm.
No one's ever called me a vendor. I reject that term. Well, we're a vendor. We're in there selling you gimmicks and we're
Yeah.
selling you templates, and we're not vendors. We're private advisors to show them how that they can do this, and we want to empower them. Ultimately, I want to get hired to get fired. I want to be able to build someone an internal component and then leave. If I'm using a model as a guerrilla advisor like T.E. Lawrence, I don't want to be living there the entire time. I want to teach them and then I want to get out.
Mm. And there's a great point to that. You think about Lawrence as a great example. In as we look about it, there's always boundaries. As soon as you split something, there's a boundary. It's like same with us at an individual level. Kit, you're your own identity, and even though I can communicate to you, it's going to go through some sort of transference to how you interpret it. And that's the same with organizations. We're stepping into their boundary, so we need to be curious in that sense to understand the language, to understand as you put it, the trauma or the path dependency. What's happened previously? How have they got to this situation? And it's not a point of blame; it's a point of curiosity. And you've done well when, um, and you really sort of get in there when people forget that you're an external person and
Mm.
you're one of them. And I think that's that cultural depthness that Lawrence had, and that's what you got to do because you can't go in there with um, your consultancy language and all this because you've got that misinformation transfer. You're not talking in that boundary, so you need to understand them, be curious, learn about them,
Mm.
um, to really then communicate in a way that they'll listen to and understand. Um, yeah, I think that's right. Otherwise, if you just go off in the dark corner, you come in as like most do and say, "Oh, you're all wrong because you're not doing this great framework 3 step to thing." That's just that's just rubbish. Yeah.
I,
I
I mean, my background too, I was a liaison officer in two different formats. One is a field artillery liaison officer in the Marine Corps, to an infantry battalion, and then I had three forward observer teams that would go and embed in each one of the companies inside that battalion. And then two, I spent about a year as a liaison, training foreign militaries in Southeast Asian countries. And in both cases, to Mike's point, you really have to do you have to become, to a point, part of their organization, and you have to be able to see it from their perspective in
Mm,
order to affect any kind of change or habit. So, like in the artillery sense, so our battery was in direct support of a Marine Rifle Battalion, by organization, and immediately when I got that job, you go right over and you meet the battalion commander and you meet the operations officer and you meet the fire support coordinator and you meet all the company commanders. And, I was a first lieutenant and these are all captains or higher, right? Captains, majors, and one lieutenant colonel. But then I would involve my Marines who were forward observers. Like, so, you go with your company when they go out and train, you go with them, and you eat with them and you get to know, the second lieutenant's got to get to know the company commander and the XO really well. And and it's once that alignment and that perspective sort of binds together, then you're really able to bridge the whole culture of the two organizations together so that when the battery goes to train or fight or whatever with the infantry battalion, that cohesion is already there. That mutual trust is already there, and it comes from, again, kind of like going back to Lawrence. It comes from by being able to put yourself in their perspective and understand and see things from their point of view.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I'm hearing a synthesis in my head with, my counseling practice. One of the things that they teach you up front is you have to have unconditional positive regard for your client. And so you're not looking at them when they come to you as, okay, kind of like what Mike was saying, you guys already screwed everything up, so now you're coming to me. You're coming to my office because your life's a mess and you want me to help you. You genuinely have to go, okay, this person is a valuable human being or a valuable organization or whatever the case may be from our different contexts. And that curiosity, because really what all three of us are serving as is a mirror.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
so, as we have to build up enough trust so that when they see themselves in that mirror, they don't freak out and
Yeah.
run away.
Yeah. And you have to be humble about it too. So,
Yeah.
like when I was a forward observer, when I was a young second lieutenant forward observer and the fire support coordinator in a Marine rifle company would usually be the weapons platoon commander. I'm basically taking 6 months of in-depth school that I had to go to learn how to be an artillery officer, to how to integrate it into his battle plan or his business, so to speak, where he may have had 6 days versus my 6 months of education and training around that. And yet sometimes you can detect those personalities. Like I can think of the first one I ever dealt with. I mean, okay, he knew everything and he was going to show the world how stupid I was. And that's really the wrong angle to take. Now, others were the opposite. Like, hey, we're going to learn this together. We're going to do this together. We're going to get better together. In every one of those situations. And that first one, by the way, ended up getting to that. This person got pretty significantly humbled, not by me, um, but by not by not allowing that sort of mutual trust to even happen, and
Mm.
perspective sharing. And that's what a Marine rifle company in that case was doing with an artillery forward liaison, forward observer. I mean, if the balloon goes up, we want to survive and come out successful. But we're not going to be able to do that if we're going to sit there and, you're going to tell me where you went to college and you're going to tell me how smart you are. You're going to tell me you know more than me and that outrank me. I'm like, good luck. I mean, then we're all going to die.
Yeah.
You know?
And, and I think it comes back to that humility that when we come in, is that the same as you be with your clients. It's not it, it's not that you just got some special skills that you can see something that they can't. It's
Right.
just that in that time and the moment, I've got the privilege of being outside that boundary, and I can look in and see the whole where they're like in it. They're carrying everything. So it's like I can see it pretty quick, but that's because I'm looking at it from a privileged position that I'm outside that boundary. And so it's always sometimes how do you go, how do you spot that? And it's because I can sit here and just concentrate on that, where you can't because you've got all this other stuff going on as well. So let's just help you unpick that. And I think that's something we've got to be mindful and have the humility about.
Absolutely.
It's also a good signal on culture climate too, how, like when the way we approach advisory and teaching, we like to think and we try to create an environment where everybody's happy to see us, not unhappy to see us or not scared of us. And last summer, I went down and to a geographic location to be on the ground with someone in the territory that was relatively new to the company that I was working with, and you could tell that they were not of that company originally, and you could tell that all they heard the word was consultant, and this person was almost unbearable to work with because whatever bias or bad experience he had with consultants at his previous firm, it had rattled his cage. And then he thought, and he was brand new too, he also thought that his job's at risk because they're sending down consultants. And I think after 2 days, he finally started to realize, like, I'm not there to get him fired. I'm actually there to make him more successful. And I think that his attitude changed. But people do have that um, bad taste of what it is that they think we do. And then I think that when you show them what you actually do, they either warm up to it or they don't. And if they don't, they probably have something inside them that's going to impede their progress to be successful.
It's like the office space mentality, right? You're here to
The
ask me what
Bobs.
I do.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. It's the Bobs.
the
But
Bobs.
I think when you're talking about this humility model and
We're
all of
not, we're
these,
not, Ponch and I are not the Bobs, by the
you
way.
you are not the Bobs,
Nope,
no.
not at all. Not at all.
Um, but when you talk about humility and being a mirror and all of these things that you do, I love the Socratic method that
Yeah.
gets used, right? I use it, you guys use it, where I'm just going to keep asking you questions out of that sense of curiosity, like Mike talks about, out of that sense of humility. Hey, there's no judgment here. Help me understand where you're at. How did we get here?
Yeah.
And is it possible that? And that's a question I use all the time. Is it
You,
possible that the map is this?
do you know who the best is for that? Because you said the word Socratic is Bruce Gudmundson.
I'm so excited. He just agreed to come on my next episode, so
I'm
it's going to
so
be awesome.
thrilled and happy to hear that.
I follow him on
I,
Substack. He's brilliant.
I mean, he's a great friend and mentor. I first met Bruce when I was a brand new second lieutenant at the basic school in 1998. And I say met him, I got to attend a lecture of his and shake his hand. Because he's been such a famous and well-known marine theorist and scholar for many, many years, who, by the way, had lunch with John Boyd. And when we were in the archives, one trip, Punch and I found this thing where Boyd was writing about his meeting with Bruce Gudmundson, which was really cool.
Oh,
But
wow.
but Bruce does, and he's been a guest on our show. Bruce does what's called decision forcing cases, and we can talk offline. Maybe, but I was going to say, if you're going to maximize the time there, is to realize that humility and the Socratic approach is a big part of it. And if you go into something thinking that you know everything, he's going to show you really quickly that you don't. And as learned as Bruce is, he is one of the greatest scholars and students you can find out there, and he's living proof that to be the best teacher, you also have to be the best student. And I would tell anybody, watch our or listen to our episode with Bruce, because more companies should do something like that. I try to help create that environment where you can build decision forcing cases and you can challenge each other openly without rancor or emotion, because that's where the improvement comes in. That's where the growth is.
I
Yeah.
think that's actually an excellent place to kind of wrap up. But Mark, tell
Oh,
me where
can I
people.
just tie one more thing in,
Yes, you
kid?
can.
And I know that I keep adding onto this. We also had another guest. His first name was Chris, and I can't think of his last name, but he's a product manager at Google, and he's never been in the military one day in his life, and he's part of Bruce's decision forcing case cohort. And he was talking about the value of that from a civilian perspective, because military history is so well documented and there's so
Mhm.
many examples, and the concepts of putting people in a situation that they don't have all the information or whatever, where they have to force a decision. He was talking about the value of that in the business world. So, you know, these sorts of things, you want to embrace and think about, because that's how you're going to thrive in complex nonlinear environments, especially as AI and tech and everything becomes more pervasive.
So I want three things from each of you. Where's your Substack? Do you have, what's the name of your podcast? And if somebody is just tuning into this and they've never heard of either of you, what's the foundational thing you want them to go read first? Mark, go.
Well, I was going to share my homepage, but that's okay. So the Substack is The Whirl of Reorientation, WHIRL, which comes from The Whirl of Reorientation. In our podcast, No Way Out, both No Way Out of The Whirl of Reorientation is a paragraph from John Boyd's Conceptual Spiral. If you just go to the Whirl Substack, you can get everything. So there's a tab that says Start Here.
Perfect.
It's designed that way for a reason. It's like, if I don't know anything about anything, go to the Start Here page. There's also a link to the podcast, so you can we post every episode on the Whirl, and then there's also a tab that says No Way Out TV, and it'll take you right to our YouTube channel to have all the YouTube versions of our podcast. So those are I guess, is that the three things that you were asking? I forget.
I think that is
Did
exactly what
I,
I was looking for.
did I miss anything?
No, you're good.
Yeah. And you
Mike,
should also check out our recommended page. And we recommend where strategy meets reality. We recommend your page, and we recommend Bruce Gudmundson that we talked about. So you should check out who we recommend, because we do vet, and we like to have people like yourselves that are aligned with us in our tribe and our network.
Awesome.
amen to that. Mike?
Yeah, so my Substack is When Strategy Meets Reality. So you go on there. I don't ever really have one where to start on. I don't have a particular order. My brain doesn't work that way. So I sort of um, my my writing's all about what's happened and what's come to mind. So, but there's good ones on there. On there you can find my podcast is Strategy Meets Reality podcast, and that's on all YouTube thing. That's season one. We start season two in February, so season two will be out in February. So I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, and I'm always up for a chat and debate. So please, if anyone wants me just to have a chat, can please reach out to me. There's nothing more I love to talk about than strategy, leadership, or
Oh,
organization.
you'll
So
you'll both
more than
be
happy.
back, I'm sure. I'm pretty excited because there's such a huge body of stuff to talk about, to try to narrow it down and be like, okay, we're just going to talk about this today. It's really hard for me because, well, Mark, you and I have had conversations where we start here and we end up like 80,000 miles somewhere else, but that's where the
Mhm.
best work gets done. So
Yeah.
maybe we'll have to do one of those where we just let it be whatever it is and see what happens. We'll go live something one day.
Sometimes it's finding out that you can stop doing things and start doing other things that actually you end up saving a lot of time, and you close that distance.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, to your point, that's also the challenge, and maybe Mike has a comment or two on this. I think that's also the challenge of when you're talking about strategy and leadership. I think if you're doing it well and you're following thinkers like John Boyd or Marshall McLuhan or others, these are extremely interdisciplinary scholars that are pulling from so many disciplines, not limited to, war fighting or history or philosophy or engineering or anything like that. They're literally pulling from everything. So you can go in so many directions. On the other hand, it's also too why it's customizable to just about anybody, because the concepts apply to not only everybody, but also any discipline. So for those that would think anything that Mike or I talk about in his work and mine, that it's not applicable to you because you weren't in the military,
Hmm.
you're completely wrong. We don't have to go into details, Kit, but you know somebody who's never spent one day in the military who is the greatest John Boyd student of all times, and maybe you should have her on the show at some point.
She's my next message.
There you go.
She's coming on my podcast in a couple. Well, I'm speaking to her next week.
I
Imagine
saw
that.
Yes.
that.
There we
I'm
go.
very
Yes.
excited to watch that
Yes.
one.
So, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Yeah, and that's exactly right. And that's the thing that people sometimes say to me, because I'm military, they expect it to all be about military. And so, yeah, I spent a long time in the military, but it's that interdisciplinary approach, complexity theory, systems thinking, philosophy, it all comes in. And I do remember someone who was like, Mike, I really want to, as ex-military guy, I really want to, get to where you are and all this stuff. And I said, I'm not anywhere, but if you want to, any sort of recommendations, read this, read that. And they didn't want to do the hard work. And you're like, you've got to read this stuff. You've got to look beyond what you think leadership is defined as, and start looking at other things. And it's the joy in how you can interpret and relate that to what it means. I was finding weird stuff and thinking, how does that, how could I look at that in a different lens, and what does that mean? And I think that's the really crucial thing.
I think that if I had to pick a mentor, it'd probably be Mark, because I've had, counterintelligence, trauma counseling, different unrelated fields. And I've been writing on Substack for 4 years. And it's just probably a year ago that Mark's like, have you read XYZ? Oh, well, I'm familiar with that. No, you're not. Go read this. And just piling on and shooting that fire hose at my face.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
the older I get and the more I read, like you talked about earlier, the dumber I get. And so the more I'm like, no, 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 I need more, I need more. But you guys are both so right where it does, everything is spaghetti. And I tell people that all the time when they say, well, this doesn't have to do with this. No, it absolutely does. Imagine a plate of spaghetti that has been sitting out for a hot minute and now it's all stuck together. Like that's literally what you're talking about, where if it's a human system, it doesn't matter what the human system is doing. What matters is that there's humans in it.
So I would have picked Mike because not only of the quality of his content and the content of his character as a leader, because nobody speaks English like the English do. So
The
when
the
you
accent is definitely a benefit. I will give you
when
that
you're
one.
born in Kentucky and raised in Pittsburgh, you can butcher the King's English. So no, I'd pick Mike as a mentor too. So
That's hilarious. Well, thank you guys for coming
Thanks,
on.
Lou. Oh, it's been
yeah,
a
thanks
pleasure.
for
Thank
having
you.
us.
For more information, visit When Strategy Meets Reality and The Whirl of Reorientation, both on Substack. Until next time, this has changed the game.